Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Daily BizLink. Jane Cebrynski is back, and we're talking about human-to-human connection. So, Jane, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Good morning on this beautiful little rainy Thursday we have.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, I love it. Yeah, it's very refreshing.
It's super refreshing. So do you have a 10 moment for me?
My 10 moment actually includes you. This week we hosted an awesome women in business dinner for a small group of women that haven't really networked or met with one another before. By far, a 10 moment. The women that were at the table, they're all 10s, and then getting the entire group together just created for a 10 evening. So really fun.
You know, I have to agree. And actually, it kind of fits in with what we're talking about today, because I was just thinking about the group this morning. And what I was thinking about was our conversations were really that human to human connection, getting to know everybody's story a little bit more. I don't even know what some of them do professionally. Like we didn't even focus on that so much as really just getting to know one another as humans. And that is so important right now. And that's why I just wanted to kind of talk about that human to human connection and talk about some little basic skills that maybe aren't so basic that we can practice to be more intentional on that human to human connection.
Yeah. And I think it's really timely and relevant in the sense that, yeah, we've been on Zoom calls and we've been, virtually meeting with people, but our people skills are a little out of practice, especially when it comes to meeting face to face. So as we're looking to, start getting more of those face-to-face meetings on the calendar, let's talk about upskilling. What can we do to enhance that human to human connection?
Well, I want to kind of strip it down to like the very basic and fundamental, but one that I have seen lacking and one that I find really, really important. And that is the skill and the practice of knowing people's names and acknowledging people by name and remembering people's names. And, it made me think about this because as a yoga instructor, I make it a practice to acknowledge every one of my students when they come in. And I average, 20, 21 people post-COVID in my classes. And one of my students was asking me the other day, like, Jane, how do you remember people's names? And I thought, oh my gosh, that's kind of a skill that I have developed over the years. And so I thought I would just share that with your audience and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, as a professional networker, I would love to hear the tips and the tricks, because this is certainly an area that I know I could look to enhance.
Well, first I want to talk about, why does it even matter? Because I have witnessed a lot of introductions where people don't even say their name, and I think, wow, like, what does that say about ourselves and our identity? Because one of the things we know, science has shown us that the brain is activated in a very different way when it hears our name. And it's a very important part of the development of our personal identity and our personality. And the other thing is that we know that when you acknowledge people by name, it helps to build a connection and a more trusting relationship. People tend to want to work with and do business with people that they feel more comfortable with. And when you acknowledge people by name, it creates a little bit of comfort. But beyond that, what it really says to me is you matter. You are important enough for me, because we've all been in those situations where somebody we've met, maybe even multiple times, doesn't remember our name. And you're thinking like, geez, did I make that little of an impression on your life? Or are you so busy that you can't remember my name? I think, so it does a lot to help build self-esteem and just let somebody know that you matter, you are important, and you're important enough for me to remember. So I have some strategies and techniques that I've developed over the years, and I think they're pretty common practice. So I'll share them. So this started when I was 17 and started working for a bank. And the one thing my dad said to me was, get to know people's names, get to know their names. So what I started to practice doing is, of course, when I would hear their name or see their name, they were maybe bringing in a deposit slip or something, I would, first of all, acknowledge them by name. And so that's first and foremost, and if somebody doesn't give you their name, do not be afraid to ask, what's your name? And there's an important thing too that I've witnessed and experienced is if somebody has a difficult name, like one of my best friends has a really hard name, the way it's spelled and pronounced are very different. Simply ask, say, how do you, okay, will you pronounce that for me again? Or will you spell your name? Me being a visual learner, when somebody says their name, if I ask them to spell it, it gets retained in a mental imagery for me as well. And so I think that it's super important. People would rather you ask or simply acknowledge, like, okay, I can't remember your name. Will you say it for me again? Than to have those awkward conversations where you're like, oh crap, I can't remember. Another technique is to make an association. So, I might, for example, there's Patrick, and Patrick is an Irish name, and he came in wearing a 3-leaf clover t-shirt. Like, I just always remember that. So I made an association with Patrick and this green Celtics jersey I think he was wearing with a clover on it. And you can maybe make a connection to somebody else who already has the same name. Or like I use celebrities sometimes. So I have Kara in my mind right now because she looks like Drew Barrymore. I would also make little notes about something that they said or something we talked about. And I might put that, on my phone as a little note, as a reminder, to help me remember and create that alliteration again. And I think just really first deciding that it's important to you, deciding that you want to care enough and that they matter enough to know their name is the first, intention that you begin to set. What do you think? Do you have any strategies or techniques that have helped you remember names?
Oh, one of my strategies, because sometimes it's hard to remember first and last names. So sometimes the number one priority I would just encourage people to remember is just their first name. And as you look to introduce them, if you're like, well, hey, I want to introduce you to my friend Jane. Jane, I can't quite recall what's your last name again. And if you just mention it and introduce them that way, it's not offensive at all whatsoever, because you at least remembered their first name and you helped with, additional introductions for them. So that might be one winning strategy. Certainly none of us are perfect, and there will be times where you forget people's names, but just being honest and transparent and showing that you care enough to ask again what it is, I think goes a really long way with people.
Well, and I think, and I've heard this and I've experienced it too. So I'm not saying that I'm perfect I'm not perfect at this by any means, but I've had people say their name and I've immediately forgotten it, like within 3 seconds. And what that really says to me is, what, I'm not focused, I'm not present. And oftentimes it's, we might be distracted by several people that we're meeting. But, now if you're back to handshaking or hand bumping or whatever it is that you're doing, at least if you can look them in the eye, you're taking a moment to be very present with that person. And odds are you'll do a better job of remembering their name. And then if you just repeat the name, really nice to meet you, Lindsay, then you've put it back into your brain another time. I also, for example, when I'm teaching yoga, I will use their name oftentimes throughout my class to acknowledge something great that they're doing, or, to just engage in conversation with them. And again, just as a way to let them know that I do see them, they matter, they're important to me, and I value who they are.
So Jane, as we like to wrap up today's conversation, is there a specific challenge that you'd like to offer to our audience?
Yeah, go out there and, when you're in the grocery store, acknowledge the clerk by name. They have a name tag. If you're at a restaurant, practice acknowledging and saying people's names. It will help build their self-esteem. And you never know what kind of a day somebody's having or what their energy feels like or how they're feeling about themselves. And simply by acknowledging their name and then practice, remembering people's names before if you're going to go and meet with a group of people, see maybe who on LinkedIn, see if you can get to know their name, get to know their face a little bit before you actually meet them. And that will help too. But yeah, go out there and practice, saying people's names, acknowledging people by name, remembering people's names.
Some great tips there. So Jane, thanks again for joining us for today's episode of the Daily Biz Link.
Thanks so much. Was it Lindsay?